Welcome to Faith for the Apocalypse. My name is Nick, and this YouTube channel is a space for us to come together and talk faith, politics, and whatever else we want, which is usually going to be history and science fiction. Thank you to those who are joining me so early in my YouTube journey. You'll notice I've moved locations from the last video. I am still working out where the best place is to be as far as lights and sounds, and I just appreciate all of the support as I start to figure out this whole streaming thing. This is my second video, and it's the first weekly video that goes along with our 2025 devotional. If you are interested in getting either weekly or daily emails with that devotional, you can click the link below and sign up. For right now, that devotion is free, so it's open to anyone. Feel free to share with anyone else. Each week, you'll get a weekly overview guide as well as daily printouts to help you kind of get through the day in our really complicated and difficult world that we have. Today, we are digging into our very first topic and the title of this video, which is Finding God, Disobeying Herod. If you worship in a congregation, you'll likely be celebrating Epiphany this Sunday. Epiphany is the day that Christians commemorate the coming of the three wise men as they brought gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh to the baby Jesus. We celebrate Epiphany every January 6th. I know, every January 6th, which is the 13th day of Christmas and marks the end of the Christmas season. Well, the night before marks the end of the Christmas season, as Epiphany kind of stands out as its own holiday. The liturgical color for Epiphany is gold, right? It has a very light and royal feeling to it. The word epiphany comes from Greek epiphania, which means appearance or a manifestation, because it is the day that we celebrate God's appearance here on earth and his revelation of himself to the people around him. In churches, when we celebrate Epiphany, we typically look at one particular scripture with the story of the Magi that we're going to dig into today. Or you might have churches who like to use the scripture about Jesus's baptism. Either way, what we're celebrating on Epiphany is the fact that God incarnate shows us, the world, that God is here. If you're a church-going person, you're probably going to hear a sermon about Jesus as the light of the world or Jesus as the coming king on Epiphany. Most of the verses in the lectionary outside these two gospel stories are filled with references to light and the power and glory of an incoming king. This is a day that is about the change that is about to come about because of this great miracle that has happened. And that is an important lesson, and one that I hope you enjoy this Sunday if you are someone that worships in the church. But I think we can look at this story of the three wise men a little bit differently if we're willing to open ourselves up to look at the similarities between the kind of political situation they found themselves in and the political situation we find ourselves in today. Our key scripture from this week comes from the book of Matthew, chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. I'm going to be using the Common English Bible for my translation today. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem, in the territory of Judea, during the rule of King Herod, Magi came from the east to Jerusalem. They asked, "Where is the newborn King of the Jews? We've seen his star in the east, and we've come to honor him." When King Herod heard this, he was troubled, and everyone in Jerusalem was troubled with him. He gathered all the chief priests and legal experts and asked them where the Christ was to be born. They said, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for this is what the prophet wrote. You, Bethlehem, land of Judah, by no means are you least among the rulers of Judah, because from you will come one who governs, who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the Magi and found out from them the time when the star had first appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search carefully for the child. When you found him, report to me, so that I too may go and honor him." When they heard the king, they went. And look, the star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stood over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were filled with joy. They entered the house and saw the child with Mary, his mother. Falling to their knees, they honored him. Then they opened their treasure chests and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Because they were warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they went back to their own country by another route. One of my pet peeves growing up in the church is when we approach biblical characters as if they are only characters in a story and not characters from history, where we might be able to learn some more things about them in our historical record. The Herod in this story is a Herod that we know a fair amount about. Herod the First, or Herod the Great, was a Jewish client king in the Roman Empire who lived from about 72 BCE to 4 BCE. He's not the same Herod that you're thinking of from the crucifixion story. That's his son, Herod Antipas. This is Herod the First, who was not born a king but became a king and then birthed a dynasty of kings, the Herodian dynasty, that lasted until about 100 Common Era. Now, Herod first got power largely because of his father's close relationship with a certain general and leader, Julius Caesar. Because of this relationship, Herod became governor of Galilee when he was only 25 or 28 years old. Throughout his career, he kind of moves through military and political positions, but maintains this close relationship with power even after Julius Caesar's death in 31 BCE, as Herod has a relationship and goes on military campaign with Mark Antony, who is now in charge of the Roman Empire. It is through his military activity with Mark Antony that Herod ultimately becomes the sole ruler of Judah and kind of kicks off this Herodian dynasty of kings. He's the sole leader and unofficially king until 34 BCE, when the Roman Senate officially names him King of Judea. Now, only 3 years later, in 31 BCE, Mark Antony, this person who had supported Herod in his leadership, all of a sudden loses power of the Roman Empire. All of a sudden, Octavian, or Augustus Caesar, is in control. And now that relationship, which had so helped Herod on his way to power, has become a bit of a threat. You see, as the government system above him is changing, Herod has to prove that his loyalty was not to an individual, but his loyalty is to the empire, which is now under a more conservative government under Augustus Caesar. During his reign, King Herod had a lot of power, a lot of freedom, a lot of control of how he was to rule his people. But he was only able to have that power and have that freedom as long as he was supported by the system which existed above him. So Herod's reign is an uncertain one, which is kind of defined by a desperate need to prove loyalty to something kind of far away. So that brings us to our story today. We have this insecure leader who has absolute control and behaves somewhat despotically for the people who are around him, but he is also beholden to the larger economic interests of the empire, which has granted him that power. Starting to sound kind of familiar yet? And then we have these three magi, and they show up with Herod alongside all of these other activities we know about in the Bible, these prophecies, and this star, which says there is this king coming. And Herod is rightfully shaking in his boots, right? Because he's insecure about the power he has. He wants to know what this thing is so he can eliminate it or control it in order to maintain his power. Because you see, a new king is a threat either because it might invade and take on his power, or the existence of someone calling themselves king might show the empire above him that he's not in control and needs to be replaced in his area. The baby Jesus is a problem for an insecure Herod. But Herod's not just insecure, he's also overly confident. I always thought it was so interesting in this story that Herod hears what the wise men have to say and say, "Go, continue on your journey, find what you find so that I may go and worship this new king too." He lies about what his motivations are, but he doesn't actually do anything to ensure he gets what he wants, right? He tells the Magi to come back pretending to have good intentions instead of, I don't know, sending a servant along with them, someone who's guaranteed to come back and tell you what you need to know. Herod is so confident of his control of his surroundings that these three wise men from another country are moving through, and he assumes what he tells them to do, they're going to go ahead and do. And that's not what happens in this story. The Magi have this audience with Herod, so we can assume that they in some way enjoyed his hospitality. They were able to leave from being under his roof, so presumably there was some kind of acquiescence or agreement that they would indeed come back to share what they had found. Seemingly, everyone left on good terms. The Magi then go and see the miracle of God, this innocent and amazing liberative force that's going to be here on the planet in the flesh. They're warned in a dream, or maybe their guts just knew that Herod is kind of sketchy and we shouldn't really trust him. And they decide, we're not going to do what we said we were. We're going to go home another way. Even though I am not following the rule of those who are in power, even though I could be in trouble if I am found in this land before I get home, I'm not going to do what was asked of me because I've seen God and I know that that's not the right thing to do. So here we are, celebrating Epiphany on the anniversary of January 6th as we stare down the barrel of a second Trump presidency. And while it is always worth remembering and celebrating that God, through Jesus, became incarnate and was light and flesh at once on earth, I think this Epiphany, it might be more important than ever for us to pay attention to the lesson from the Magi and their noncompliance with King Herod. Authoritarian structures and systems come to power and escalate their control through compliance and preemptive compliance of the population. Folks see that something more oppressive is coming and they prepare and they give concessions out of fear, thinking that might make things easier, when in reality, it can speed up timetables to horrible atrocities happening. I know I'm probably not the only person who's been really frustrated with news media, especially following Trump's election. You see, whether you're following online progressive news media that's moving towards the middle, or you're one of Morning Joe's viewers who were horrified when they sat down with the president-elect at Mar-a-Lago and said, he's not so bad. A lot of us have seen folks who were once critical of the incoming regime now working in support of it. Unfortunately, our systems that are easy to access are not systems of resistance in light of oppression. If those around us are not willing to stand up and declare what is right, then we are in good company with a history of followers of Jesus who were willing to follow the example of God incarnate, practicing justice and love with all of those around us. Now, I know that this is probably going to be a hard week. I know it's probably going to be a hard week at the beginning of a hard month because of our political and social conditions. But I also know that we have a God who calls for us to stand for what is right, who offers us peace and assurance and community as we continue to do the hard work of building God's kingdom and kingdom in the world around us. So that's what this week is about. Listening for God and preparing ourselves to maybe disobey Herod a little bit. Because some of us might be finding that we need to go home by a different way than the road that led us here. Now, I want to caution against that feeling or impulse that we have to fix everything right now. This week isn't about fixing all of the injustice in the world, but it is about listening for God and preparing us for the struggle that might be coming ahead. Now, if you are following along in the daily Devos On Monday, we have an embodied prayer and meditation to help us identify and release any stress we might be holding in our bodies on the anniversary of January 6th. On Tuesday, we have a history lesson where we'll dig a little bit deeper into the similarities between the socioeconomic political situation that Jesus was born into and the one we find ourselves in today. On Wednesday, we will look to Christian history for some examples of noncompliance in the face of oppression and repression. On Thursday, we'll dig into a new spiritual practice as we read Isaiah 43 and listen for God's voice calling to us in our current wilderness. Finally, Friday, we have some soul care as we reflect on finding the helpers and talk about how we can find places to get plugged in for support and camaraderie as we continue to fight for what is right and bring God's light into the world. Thank you so much for being here today. If you liked this video, please like, comment, subscribe to the channel, share the channel with others, share that sign up for the devotional. I'll be back here on Wednesday with a video about the slow march towards fascism to talk about how authoritarian regimes gain and maintain power. And then we'll be back here again next Saturday for our next Bible lesson. Thank you so much for joining us and have a wonderful week.